Hey everybody, welcome to Scotty's Moto Garage. So for this week's post, I'm going to do a little something different. I shot a lot of video footage this week and thought I was recording a lot of good commentary to go along with that footage, but apparently I don't know what I did, but I did something wrong. And so I have a bunch of footage of me riding my bike and a lot of mic'd up sound of my bike, but no audio for the commentary portion of it. So not gonna lie, I was a little bit disappointed earlier when I figured that out, because that was a lot of talking. And of course, you know, whenever things don't go as planned, that's when you realize, you know, you had this good flow going and you could get all this, you know, get information out and everything. So needless to say, I was a little bit bummed. Haven't decided what I'm going to do with the footage yet, but we'll go from there. So I was thinking, I was like, all right, well, you know, what can I do that would be beneficial? And so that's when I started thinking about the why I'm doing this channel. And you know, I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos, you know, and stuff, and the why I want to do this channel is I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not trying to, you know, be the next YouTube big sensation. The main thing I'm doing it for is I love motorcycles. As you can see, I got a couple of bikes. I got a Harley, I got a Yamaha, got another Harley behind you on the lift. An old shovel head I'm working on. Grew up riding dirt bikes, street bikes. If it's got two wheels, I want to try to ride it. So that's like my background. I've been around bikes for most of my life, and I love motorcycles. I think I got on my first motorcycle when I was like 5. Excuse me. But anyway, so my main why for this channel is to pass on my passion for motorcycles to the next generation, new riders. You know, hell, it could be people that are, you know, in their 40s that are just thinking about getting their first new bike, you know, or getting a bike or getting into riding. Since I've started this channel, I've been messing around a lot more than I used to on social media. And I see a lot of people asking about, you know, am I too old to get into motorcycling, you know, and of course all the, you know, what kind of bikes should I get? What, you know, what brands are the best and all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do, you know, this goes right into my why of, you know, trying to pass on information. I know there's a bunch of videos out there of everybody saying what's their first, you know, their first bike. I'm a small YouTuber, you know, who cares what I think, but I've been riding for going on 45 years. Well, technically after, yeah, 45 years, because it's after midnight. So today is actually my birthday and I turned 50 today. So that being said, I've been riding for a long time. I've ridden a lot of different bikes. I've ridden through all kinds of weather. I've went through a stretch of time in my life where all I owned was a motorcycle. It was my only mode of transportation, so I rode through everything. And so, you know, I've worked in motorcycle dealers. I went to school to be a Harley mechanic. I went to motorcycle mechanic school in general. I specialized in Harley Davidson. Worked in Harley dealerships all across the country. And it was always kind of funny because I'd be working and, you know, in the shop, and I'd have to go as a mechanic, and I'd go up to the parts department to get something or whatever. You know, and some person would come up and talk to me because they'd see a tech and they'd be like, oh, hey, you know, what do you think about this bike? What do you think about that bike? And I don't know how many bikes I sold. You know, obviously I didn't sell it. Once I got them in the right direction, I passed them off to a salesperson. But, and the sales guys were always like, man, how do you do that? And it's just like, well, because, well, for one thing, I'm not worried about getting the sale. And I'm not trying to sell them the most expensive thing I can possibly get them into, because it doesn't matter to me. I'm not making any money off of it. I'm just giving somebody advice. But I said that's really what it comes down to, is you have to ask questions. You have to talk to people, listen to them, and then try to figure out what's going to suit them best. And if you can do that, you're not only most likely going to get the sale, but you're also going to get somebody that's going to be happy with their bike. And a lot of those people, I ended up, they'd come back to bring their bikes back into service, and so I'd be like, oh, hey man, how's that bike treating you? Oh man, it's awesome. This is exactly what I needed. And so I figured, well, this would be a good chance to answer some of those questions, because I see so many people, beginner riders, whether they're, 17, getting, saving up to get their first bike, or they're 40 and they've never had a bike, but they've really, been thinking about it and they want to jump into it or whatever. So I just figured I'd run through some of the things that I've learned over the years, and that, from working in the industry and working around, people and trying to help people get what they need. So the first thing is you got to ask yourself, what's your purpose of getting the motorcycle? So there's so many different kinds of motorcycles out there, and I'm not going to get into every single type of bike, but I'm going to stick to talking about road bikes, because obviously you got dirt bikes, and there's several different kinds of dirt bikes and all that kind of stuff, depending on what you want those for too. But I'm going to stick with road bikes. And, mainly you have your cruisers, you have sport bikes, you have your adventure touring bikes, and you have your supermoto bikes. And there's some other tweaks in there. You have, your sport touring, like you have subcategories of all those different genres. But the basic thing is you need to know what kind of bike you're looking for, and to be able to figure that out, you got to decide what you're planning on using it for. Are you planning on commuting on it? Is it just something you're going to be riding on the weekends for fun? Are you going to go on big, long touring trips? Are you planning on doing adventure sports type stuff where you're going to be just, turn around, but you might end up going off-road at some point, or not even really off-road, just going on gravel roads and stuff like that. So that's the first thing you need to figure out, is what you're going to use it for. And so that is going to determine what kind of bike you're going to get. So then once you've decided what kind of bike, what your need for the bike is, so so if you're going to be a commuter, obviously, and that's your main focus, I would say probably sticking with more of a naked bike, street fighter bike, small cruiser. Hell, you can even use a big cruiser, depends on how far you go. I have the MT-09, which is a naked bike, and then I also have a Harley Bagger, and I commute on both those. And so they each have their own things that you have to think about. My Bagger, I can just throw everything in my bags, don't have to carry a backpack, none of that kind of stuff. But then with my, MT-09, everything I'm gonna need, so when I go to work, it's warm. Like right this time of year is a perfect example. It's, it can be like 90 degrees when I leave to go to work, because I work nights, and then I get off early in the morning. So then when I come home, I'm leaving the East Bay area up here in Northern California, and it'll be 50 degrees and damp, so it's kind of wet and cold. And so I have to take, more stuff to ride home with so I don't freeze. Excuse me. So, in the Harley, no big deal. Got a bunch of bags. I can throw everything in there. Once I get to work, I can lock my helmet up in the bags. I don't have to carry anything but my backpack. When I'm on my MT-09, I got to put my cold weather gear in my backpack. I got to pack all that stuff in there, my glove liners, my liner for my jacket, like all this kind of stuff. So I'm required to carry a lot more in my backpack. So those are kind of things to think about depending on what you're using for. If you're just using it for weekend fun, pretty much sky's the limit. You can use whatever you want. I would say probably the biggest advice I could give you is, because obviously you gotta like what it looks like. So I mean, start with that. But then once you kind of have an idea of what you want, find a dealership that has that model and go in and set on it. That'd be the second thing to that part of picking out what kind of bike you want. Go set on it, see how it feels. When I bought the MT-09, it was kind of on the back burner. It was one that I was looking at, but I hadn't, I was actually went to the dealership to look for a different bike. And once I sat on the other bike, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't as comfortable. And at the time, that's what I was looking for, because I'd been riding Harleys for a long time. And so I was really worried about, being crunched up or, having a tight riding position. And so I tried the other bike, and it was nice. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't comfortable. And then this was sitting right next to it. I got on it, and I instantly knew, as soon as I sat on it, there was just something that clicked, and I was like, I like this bike. And I looked out, because here's another thing. This is another point to think about. So this is a 2023 that I picked up in 2024. The 2024s were already out, so this was a leftover from the year before. So if you can get in around the time when the new models are coming out, in the summertime, late summertime, depends on when, once the new models start coming out, that's when you want to start looking if you want to try to grab one from the year before. Because I ended up picking this up for way less than what the new ones, because I think it was late 2024, because they were trying to get rid of it hard. So anyway, so that's something to think about too. I tend to try to buy new bikes if I can, just because as being a mechanic, I've seen what people do to their bikes and stuff, and I like knowing that it's new and it's going to be taken care of the way I like it to be taken care of, and not be thrashed. And then, you buy something and instantly you need a new clutch and all this stuff because somebody just beat the crap out of it. So, not saying that there's not, especially starter bikes, a lot of times you can get a pretty decent deal on it. But from what I've seen, because I've been looking around, I'm teaching my son how to ride, and so I've kind of been looking around because I'm probably going to pick him something up within the next year. And so I wanted to get him, something, an entry-level bike. And I started looking, and it's like, man, most people want almost as much for a beginner bike that's used as, it's within $1,000 of getting a brand new one. So I'd rather just pay the extra money and get a brand new one. But that's just me. I mean, if money's tight and that's what you need to do it. I've been there. I went through a rough financial patch in my life, and I can't live without a bike. So I had actually had a sport bike repoed when I was in my 20s and dumb. And so I didn't have a bike, and it was driving me crazy. So I ended up buying a clapped out, wrecked 1985 Nighthawk 750, and the whole one side had got laid down. One side was all messed up. The bars were messed up, and so, long story short, I probably put $300-400 into it just to make it to where it was roadworthy. I rattle canned all the scratches and stuff. I didn't care exactly what it looked like that much. I was happy to be back on two wheels. So it just depends on what you need to do with it. At that time though, I was already a pretty experienced rider, so I wasn't too worried about buying. And I've always worked on bikes, and I've always worked on stuff my whole life. So I knew if something was wrong, I could most likely fix it. If you're not mechanically inclined, I'd stay away from getting something like that, because you're going to get discouraged, because you're probably going to be dumping a bunch of money into it just to keep it on the road, and it'd be better just to learn on something nice. So if you can't find a good deal on something fairly new, then I would say, stick with getting something new. But so start out, figure out what you want, whether it's a naked bike. If you're really dead set on a sport bike, then that's cool too. I know a lot of guys that commute on them. I've been thinking about getting another one, and I would commute on it. And I drive about an hour each way commuting, so it's not like I'm driving across state on it. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to ride my Harley. But anyway, so kind of sidetracked there, but just pick what you want, find what you want, like look wise, do some research on it. But then definitely, find a place that has one and, a dealership, and go sit on it, check it out, see how it feels, see how comfortable you are on it, and then go from there. The next thing I want to talk about is CC size, which is cubic centimeters. American bikes usually go by cubic inch, so the number's a lot lower. But so if you're looking at a starter bike, I would say anything from, I know they make 125s. If that's fine too, that'll be fine. I would say probably not going over a 500. If you've never ridden before at all, like if you grew up like riding dirt bikes, it's just been a long time, and you're gonna like pick it up pretty quick, you could probably get away with getting like a 600. But I would just say try to stay, under 500 cc's. Most of them are in between 250 and 500, somewhere in there. There's a lot of good bikes. You got the Kawasaki Ninjas, you got the, which I think they have a 250 and a 500. I think they might even have a 400 too. You got the Yamahas have the MT-03 and the R3. I know Honda's got some smaller bikes that are in that range. They also have the Rebel series, which I think they even have a 250, I believe. I know they used to, but they have like a 250, and then the Rebel line goes all the way up to like 1100. So I mean, if you really liked it and you wanted to stick with that, you could transfer as you get more comfortable. You could always trade it in and get another size that was bigger, but it's going to be pretty much the same bike. It's kind of the same thing with the MT-09 and the R series with Yamaha. You could start on an MT-03, then there's the MT-07, then I have the MT-09, so that's like second to the highest, and then there's the MT-10, which is basically a naked R1. So and then the R series, you have the R3, the R7. I think they did away with the 6, the R7. Then you have the R9 that just came out, and then you have the R1, of course. So those are all ones where I feel like if you fall in love with that certain brand or how it feels or whatever, you can kind of stick with it, and the brand and that series will grow with you. So that's something to think about. But I wouldn't go any higher than that. The bigger CCs you get, it means a bigger motor, it means a bigger bike, which means it's heavier. It means that it's a lot more powerful. It's a lot less forgiving when you make mistakes with it. So yeah, just start out in that range of 250 to if you can find a 125. I know they make some. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but that would be fine too. But whatever, just stay under 500. And then that's a good place to start. So the next thing we're talking about is weight. I know we kind of touched on that on the last topic, because the bigger bikes obviously are heavier. But also when it comes to weight, you also have to deal with balancing. Most bikes, once you get rolling, the balancing part isn't that big, but like when you're new, you have a tendency to mess up on the clutch, and then you tip over. It's a lot easier to catch a lighter bike than a heavy one. So especially when you're doing your low speed maneuvering, stuff like that, a lighter bike's going to be, once again, less forgiving. And then if you do mess up, And if you drop it, which most likely you probably will, you'll be able to pick it up easier. It sucks. Trust me, I had to pick up my 800-pound Harley before, and it's not fun. I'll just say that much. So that those are some things when it comes to weight that you should keep in mind. The next thing I want to talk about is the budget. Obviously that's different for everybody, but there's a lot of times people don't think about things when they're looking at their first bike. They're just fixated on the price of the bike. And so, before I switched, there was one other thing I wanted to say real quick when we were talking about weight, is if you're not dead set on a sport bike, a lot of times starting out with like a cruiser style bike is not a bad idea, especially like I said, like the Honda Rebels or something like along those lines. A lot of times the seat heights are a lot shorter on them, so you can reach a lot better and you have a lot more control, and they're usually not as performance oriented. So if you decide to go with that route, you can always switch to a sport bike later on and go from there. I understand that it's a lot of it, like I said, is a look thing. So some people don't like they don't like a sport bike, or they don't like a cruiser or whatever. So I get that. But anyway, so going on to budget. So you need to factor in a lot of things when you're getting ready to get a bike. So for one thing, once you get the bike, hopefully before you get the bike, you're going to have to get your endorsement on your license, which I don't know what it is where you are, but I know here in California, it's like $400 to take the Motorcycle Safety Foundation course, which is what I recommend. You can go take the course through the DMV without doing that, but as a new rider, I really suggest doing the MSF course, because for one thing, you use their bikes, so you can start learning how to do the clutch and all that kind of stuff, and do some slow maneuvering and stuff. And if you drop it, it's their bike, not yours. So I actually took the MSF course before I got my first road bike, when I went to transfer from dirt bike riding to road bike riding. Even though I knew how to ride pretty well, I had never really ridden road, but I grew up riding dirt bikes. So I it didn't take me long to pick it up. But, I was like, might as well use their bike before I go get a bike of my own. Plus, the other thing that's cool with it is once you take your course, and you pass the MSF course, you don't have to take the driver's portion of the course when you go to the DMV. All you have to do is go in there and show them your certificate, take your written test, pay them the money, and you get your endorsement on your license. And in my experience, and from what I've heard talking to other people, the MSF course instructors are a lot easier to get along with, so, heaven forbid, you say anything about the DMV people. Anyway, I'm not going to get negative. They're not my favorite people in the world. But anyway, so you gotta get your course, so that's going to cost you some money there. And then once you get the bike, obviously you're either going to save up for it, or you're going to, finance it, whatever you're going to do. So you're going to have either payments, or you're going to be saving up for a while, whatever. Well, then afterwards you're going to have insurance. And depending on your age and what kind of bike you get, that can vary widely. I know back in the day when I think I was 23 when I 22 or 23 when I first got my first sport bike, and I got a Yamaha R6. I was all excited, and I didn't check anything out before ahead of time. Got the bike, started looking for insurance, and man, it was like my payments were like $250 a month, and my insurance was $250 a month, because I was a young 20s dude, and so they were like, and I about died, because I was like, man, I can't afford this. I can't, I wasn't stacked. I was definitely, struggling 20 something. So then I was like, man, what am I going to do? So then luckily I called around and I found an insurance company that I don't know how they had it put into their system, but I ended up getting it for like $100 a month. So But anyway, just a word of advice: do some checking, maybe get a quote ahead of time once you kind of decide what kind of bike it is that you want. Especially if you're looking at sport bikes, cruisers and stuff aren't as big of a deal. If you're a young guy, your insurance rates are going to be higher than if you're a girl. Just the way it is. And so just, especially if you're going to get a sport bike, check beforehand just to make sure that, you're going to get, you're not going to get blindsided by a big insurance bill once you get your bike. And then the other thing is you're going to get gear. How much gear you wear, that's on you. I'm a big proponent of wear what you want. I don't know if it's coming from my background of being a Harley rider for a lot of years. I wore helmets and stuff and everything when I was growing up riding dirt bikes. When I first got into street bikes, I always wore helmets and stuff like that. And then I got into riding Harleys, and for a long time I didn't wear any safety gear. And but then I moved out here to Washington after I got out of the Army, and I split lanes here a lot, and I was like, you know what, that might be a good idea, and then it really cemented it because a couple years after I moved here, one of my friends went down splitting lanes and pretty much landed straight on his face, which, luckily he had a full face helmet on, because the helmet took the brunt of it, messed the helmet up, but better that than his face. And so I was like, yep, okay, I'm sold. So that was kind of my last, time of like not wearing any gear. And I still wear less gear sometimes than a lot, I call them the gear police on social media. They're quick to tell you exactly, what gear you're missing. But anyway, so, wear what you want, but I would suggest, at least some kind of, a good pair of boots, whether they be for a cruiser or even riding shoes. Like a lot of times I have some high top Alpine Star, riding, I guess you would call them shoes / boots. When I'm on my Harley, I wear steel-toed Carhartt lace-up boots. Jeans at the bare minimum, preferably if you can afford it, get some. They make a lot of really cool like jeans / riding pants that have like padding and stuff in it. But it's also, you have to, like, I also commute to work, so like I'm not gonna go wear riding pants around at work all day. So there's times when I ride in just jeans. It depends on the weather too. If the weather's colder, then yeah, I have some over pants that I'll put over that actually have protection in them and stuff, and then I'll wear those. But at a bare minimum, jeans, long pants, and then a jacket, preferably something that's like a textile or leather that has some armor in it or something like that. Gloves, there's a whole wide range of gloves, depending, and you can go as far from like mechanics gloves that, they look cool, but they're not really going to do much if you actually go down at any kind of a speed, all the way through to, you can get gloves that are, $300-400 that are like what the guys in MotoGP wear and stuff. So the gear's huge. There's a wide range. Entry level, I know a lot of people are, especially in this economy, everybody's trying to like budget, and try to, stretch the money. And but if you look around, go to Revzilla.com, Dennis Kirk's another company that has, motorcycle gear that's pretty good. You can get some pretty decent prices on stuff. And then of course the helmet, I wouldn't skimp on the helmet, get what you can afford. There's a huge difference. Like I said, for a long time I didn't wear a helmet. I started out wearing, when I first started wearing helmets, I had like a $50 whatever, full face helmet that I put on. And then, I kind of graduated up from that, and then I ended up getting like a $250 Bell Eliminator helmet. And that one was pretty cool because it had the built-in thing for my Sena Bluetooth headset and all this kind of stuff. But I'd never spent a lot of money. And then like last year, I think I finally broke down and like bought my first really nice helmet. And I was amazed because I was like, I always telling the guys at work, and I'm like, I'm going to buy this helmet. I got it on a closeout deal, so I didn't pay full price for it, but I was like, you know what? I want to know what $1,000 helmet feels like. Is the juice worth the squeeze? So I got it, and man, I was blown away. It's night and day. The quality of it, how tight the visor snaps shut. It's not rattling. I'm not getting a bunch of wind noise. It's amazing. So, get what you can afford and go from there. I think that's about all for gear. Okay, I know we already touched on newer used bikes, but there was a couple of things that I thought of that I kind of wanted to throw in here too. Is used bikes a lot of times, especially if you get like a beginner bike that's still fairly, in good shape, has low miles, somebody else just started on it and then wanted to upgrade. If you can get one of those kind of bikes and then, it's probably already been dumped a couple of times, which isn't a big deal. Everybody drops their bike, as long as there's not any major damage to it. If you can get a better deal on that and the price is a major factor for you, then that would be something to think about. The other thing to think about though with new bikes is, usually it comes with a warranty. So if something goes wrong with the electronics, because all the bikes are packed with it nowadays, and then, or whatever, if something goes wrong with it, then you're covered. So those are a couple of things I wanted to touch base on that. And then the next thing we're going to get into is ergonomics, because depending on what you're wanting to do, or what your limitations are, if you have a bad back, definitely don't get a sport bike because you're going to be crunched over. If you have a bad wrist, it's gonna suck. You end up putting pressure on your wrists, your back, your knees got to be bent up. So if you have physical limitations, I would steer you more towards like a cruising type bike or something like that, something that's going to be a little more comfortable. If that's not an issue, then that's fine. Just be aware that it's, there's definitely a comfort level difference between, and it depends on, how much you're willing to give up comfort for going fast and having fun in the twisties. Because you can have fun with either bike. It's just a difference between whether you're having the fun because you're out having a nice chill ride and getting all zen and stuff versus, you want that adrenaline punch and you're out carving up the canyons and, pushing it a little bit enough to get your adrenaline pumping. So that's a big factor to think about, but mainly to think about it is your comfort level you're looking forward to, and also to think about it if you have any kind of physical limitations or whatever. But you should be able to set on the bike, and that's why I always say to go set on it. You should be able to set on it and be comfortable. Whether you're going to be comfortable long term, that's different. If you're on a sport bike, most people don't go out and do 350 miles straight on it. They take, they hit some twisties, they stop, they chill out for a little bit, and then they ride some more. So, just something to think about there. So, and then also whether you can get your feet down to the ground. And I know there's a lot of different. You see a lot of people on social media that tiptoe and stuff like that, and you can get your bike lowered, which of course if you lower your bike, that's going to lower your turning radius a little bit because it's going to put everything lower to the ground. But when you're just first starting out and you're not super good with your balance and all that kind of stuff, I'd say try to get something that where you can flat foot it. If you're super short and it's just not going to happen, then I understand, do what you got to do. When I was a kid and I was riding dirt bikes, most of the time those things were, the friggin' seat came up to my chest. So I'd have to put one foot on the peg, let the clutch out, and then as it took off, I'd swing up onto the back of it. So, you can make do with what you got to do, but preferably if you can, when you're first starting, then get something that you can reach the ground on flat-footed, or at least a good portion of your feet to where you're stable. And then once you get a little bit more experience and you're a little more comfortable with motorcycles, then if you want to get something that's taller that you might have to 1 foot, then hey, do your thing. I'm not a professional, so I never was taught about riding. I just started riding, and I've been doing it for a long time. I'm actually getting into continuing my motorcycle education, if you will. So I'm working on that, and I'm going to be looking at doing some track days down the road and stuff like that. So so you never stop learning. You can ride for a long time, and you can always learn something new. You can always practice something new. You should always be practicing. So yeah. Okay, so I want to touch on maintenance and reliability. So as a motorcycle mechanic, that's something that I started from a young age learning to work on my own stuff. And so that's also something, whether it goes into the budgeting and everything else. So if you don't know how to work on a bike, or you don't have a place to work on your bike, or you don't have somebody that can help you work on your bike, then that's something to factor in there, because that means you're going to have to take it to a shop, to get services, change tires, all that kind of stuff. So that's something to think about, because you're going to have to maintenance the vehicle or the bike. And so that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you have a place where you can, I highly recommend learning to, I'm not saying learn how to tear the motor down, but just at least learn to do basic maintenance on it. Change the oil. If you have a chain, learn to clean and lube your chain and adjust it correctly. Checking changing out levers, or checking your levers, or adjusting your clutch. All these things are some basic stuff that I would highly recommend people just learn to do for their bike. And you never know, you might like it. I love working on my bikes, and so it's next to riding them, that's what I like to do. So I got my shovel head all tore apart on here, because the last time I was riding it, the stator went out on it, and so it kind of snowballed. I went in to change the stator, and now I'm putting forward controls on it, and yada yada yada. New seat, shocks, springs in the forks. So I just went crazy. So anyway, yeah. So it's something that I really enjoy doing. You never know, you might like doing it. But at least learn to do the basics. Make sure you're checking your air pressure on your tires. And nowadays it's even easier, because if you don't have a garage, and where I have a garage with an air compressor, but I also have a little, I think it's called AirMoto. It's the little thing that goes in, it's this big, and then you can put it in your bag, and it'll pump up a tire. And so get one of those, because even if you're in an apartment or something, it's easy just to charge it up in your apartment and then go out, hook it up to your tire. You can set the tire pressure you want, and it'll make sure it's topped off. So apparently I talked for so long that my GoPro overheated, so I'm going to try to wrap this up before it decides to overheat again. But anyway, I don't know exactly where it cut me off, but we were talking about tires, AirMoto pump or something along those lines to keep your tire pressure. But just learn to do the basic maintenance on your bike. It'll save you a lot of money, and unless you got money to burn and you just like spending a lot of it at the dealership or someplace, getting your oil changed. But so the only other thing I was thinking about is just kind of room to grow, because you'll hear people, some people will tell you, oh, get a bigger bike, because you'll outgrow that one so fast, and then you'll be stuck with it for a while. And there's just some truth to that. If you already have some riding experience, like I said, if you grew up riding dirt bikes or something like that and you just haven't ridden in a long time, you're going to pick it up quicker than somebody that's never done it before. So yeah, I could see with that. That's why I also said a lot of the newer bikes, like a 600 has a like the technology. They have like driving modes that'll like cut the power down on the bike and stuff. So if you have some experience, you could probably go with a bigger bike and just tune the engine down with the management system, and then that way it won't be too much for you. But if it's your very first bike, yeah, get something that you're going to be comfortable with for a while. But I mean, if you get a 400 or a 500, well, hell, even a 250. I mean, unless you're like doing a lot of freeway riding, then it's going to be fine for quite a while. It's going to last. So, but yeah. So anyway, don't worry about outgrowing it. I would rather people live through learning to ride instead of getting something that's way too big for them, and then they end up getting out of control and either crashing the bike or hurting themselves or something like that. So when it comes to that, just go with something more reasonable. You can always scale up if you get something too big, and you could either scare yourself off of riding or end up crashing it and hurting yourself or worse. So just get something small to begin with. So I think that's about it. Like I said, my GoPro's about ready to overheat again, so I just wanted to shut it down and get a good, decent ending. So if you liked the content, like, subscribe, share it with somebody else, help an old man out. So anyway, yeah, and I hope you find the bike you're looking for, and I hope you have many miles of good wind therapy and happiness. And I'll catch you on the next video. All right, take it easy.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps out the channel and keeps you updated on all our latest content. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our new uploads. We've got a lot more exciting content coming your way that you definitely won't want to miss. Also, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. We love hearing from you, and we'll do our best to respond to everyone. Finally, be sure to follow us on our social media channels for more behind-the-scenes content and updates. You can find all the links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.